So first is the Eastern Christianity and Islam. The Oriental churches, which we were discussing last time, they had the longest experience of living together with Muslims in the Middle East. From the rise of Islam in the beginning of the 7th century, from the very beginning of Islam, actually Islam exploded literally through the Middle East. In the first half of the 7th century, they captured almost the entire territory, which included Persia. Well, Persia collapsed. The greatest empire, one of the greatest empires of the ancient world, collapsed rapidly under the pressure of Islam. Then they expanded to Africa, reached part of the West in Africa, and captured huge territories in modern Syria, in Palestine, Cyprus, and so forth. So the Christians, Oriental Christians who lived on those territories, they immediately experienced the presence of Islam. Their experiences were different, and they varied from time to time, from one period to another period. As for the Byzantine Christians, they had less experiences, so to say. They were not so long under the Muslim rule. They were contained in the Byzantine Empire, what we call now Byzantine Empire, which was essentially really a Roman Empire, the eastern part of the Roman Empire. And they struggled against the Muslim invasions and tried to protect their state, and actually they survived for quite a long. After Islam emerged in the beginning of the 7th century, Byzantium tried to survive under the new conditions until the 15th century, actually for quite a long. And in the 15th century, it yielded to the Turkish Ottoman Muslims. And since then, they had approximately 4 centuries of experience under the Turkish rule. So the relationship caused profound impact upon each side of this symbiosis. This impact, mutual influence, can be found in many fields, in many domains, branches. For instance, in architecture. This is one of the nicest, of the finest pieces of the Ottoman architecture. This is the so-called Blue Mosque. It was built in the 16th century. It was built in the style of the late Byzantine architecture, and it resembles the most important church of the Byzantine Empire, the Hagia Sophia, Saint Sophia. This is Sophia. Of course, these minarets were built later under the Ottomans, after they converted Hagia Sophia into a mosque. And you see, this is the resemblance, the same dome, the same structure. This mosque was built by the disciples of a famous Ottoman architect. His name is Sinan. This is the guy, or Mimar Sinan. The legend says that he was born as a Christian. He was either Greek or Armenian. He was conscribed as a Yanichar, as a soldier. The Turks had a habit of collecting children from Christian families, from babies, and they brought them to special facilities to train them as soldiers. So they converted them into Islam and trained them as soldiers, and they were the most devoted Turkish soldiers. So this guy was from these children. He showed himself as a prominent architect, and he became the most important architect of the Ottoman Empire. And he actually collected the ideas and types of architecture from the Byzantine churches, and the mosques that he built were in the Byzantine period. We are going to discuss this more in the next semester. But this is just an indication, an example, how Islam and Christianity influenced each other. Another example I discovered quite surprisingly for myself, I didn't know before I saw it. When I was in the central part of Turkey, the region called Cappadocia, which is the heartland of Asia Minor, used to be a part of the Greater Armenia. And in one of the villages, I saw this stone. The strange thing about this stone is that it is, the words are Turkish, but the letters are Greek. So the language mixed up so that they combined Turkish words with Greek characters and produced a new kind of language, which Greeks would never understand and the Turks would never understand themselves. So only those people who lived together in those villages, who communicated with each other on a daily basis, they could understand this language. So this is a token. This language is called Karamanlika. I don't know what is the origin of the word. This attitude of Christians towards Muslims and Muslims towards Christians has its reasons in Quran and in the early history of Islam, or in the early history of encounter of Christianity by Muslims and of Muslims by Christians. The Muslim sources testify that Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, encountered Christians in the earliest age. The first recording of his encounter with a Christian, who was actually an Nestorian monk, whose name was Bahira, has been testified as happening in his teens. We also know that in his 20s, on his voyage, his trade trip to the Syrian soil, Muhammad had a meeting with another Nestorian monk, and we know even the name of that monk. It's Nastur or Nestor. Analysis of Islam, analysis of the teaching of Islam, and these historical recordings led some Christian scholars like Nicholas of Cusa to conclude that Islam probably was influenced by Christianity, particularly by Nestorians. Nestorians were widely spread on the Arabian Peninsula, where Islam was born. Some other historians, like John of Damascus, who himself actually was born on the Muslim territory and knew Islam very well. He lived in the 8th century, and he believed that Islam is just a Christian sect. He said it's not a religion, it's not like Judaism, it's a Christian sect, and he called the sect Ishmaelites. He thought that Islam is a continuation of Arianism. John of Damascus, as I said, who was a prominent writer, a prominent theologian, one of the key theological minds of the early Middle Ages in the East. He was born in the Caliphate in Palestine. His Arabic name was Mansur. Although his family was Christian, he was brought in a Christian family, but the family served the court of the Caliph. And actually the family was responsible for collecting taxes in Damascus. Prominent position, not uncommon among Christians in the time that the Christians took prominent positions in the administration of the new Muslim rulers, and they retained their belief, their religion. as I said, the attitude of the Christians to new Muslim rulers varied from time to time. In the beginning, particularly those Christians who were in conflict with Byzantium, the Nestorians, and then the non-Chalcedonians, they were happy about the advance of Muslims. They saw Arabs as salvation for themselves. Because, yes?
You like this Charlie said, you saw the advancement in Arabs?
Yes, the Arabs advanced rapidly after the rise of Islam, after the birth of Islam in the beginning of the 7th century, and they were welcomed by the Christian population of the territories which they captured. The Christian population, particularly the Nestorians and non-Chalcedonians, because they were against the Byzantine Orthodox Christianity. They saw the Muslims as their salvation, because they said Muslims don't care about what we believe. The Byzantines do, and they force us to accept their faith, their interpretation of the incarnation. But the Muslims don't care about this. That's why it is easier for us to be under the Muslims than under the Byzantines. So that was the choice in most cases of the people, local people, either to collaborate or to welcome, to invite Muslims. Like, for instance, in the case of Damascus, which became a stronghold, a capital of the new Muslim caliphate, Arab caliphate. The rumors said that the father of John of Damascus, he opened the gates of Damascus to the caliph, which demonstrated the attitude of many Christians to Islam. They wanted to collaborate with Islam. There is, for instance, a testimony from the early period of encounters between Islam and Christianity, the 7th century. This testimony is coming from the Nestorian Catholicos. Do you remember what Catholicos means? Is that? What is the difference between Catholicos and Patriarch? Well, Catholicos is a patriarch, a primate of the church outside the Roman Empire. Okay, so this guy was outside of the Roman Empire. That's why he was called Catholicos. His name is Ishoyah III, and he wrote regarding the Arab conquest. These Arabs, whose God has now given sovereignty over the world, are disposed towards us, as you know. They are not opposed to Christianity. Indeed, they respect our religion and honor the priests and the saints of our Lord, and they give aid to the churches and monasteries. Which is quite true. The early caliphs that conquered the Christian lands, they tried to negotiate good terms with the local Christian communities, and particularly the monasteries, and they extended their protection to the monasteries. One of the examples is St. Catherine Monastery on the Mount Sinai, which was built by Justinian, and which is an important place, Christian place in the Middle East. And when Arabs expanded to the Sinai Peninsula, they captured this monastery, and the monks say, well, it's not necessarily true, but they say that Muhammad himself had a deal with the monastery and granted a permission for the monastery to function properly, as it should be. We don't know, he only requested the monastery to build a mosque, to build a prayer place, Muslim prayer place on its premises, which monks happily did. They actually built a special edifice on the premises. Otherwise, they just retain their beliefs. And actually, they still, we don't know, it's rather unlikely that Muhammad himself, probably one of the caliphs did this, but probably unlikely that Muhammad himself had such a deal with the monastery, but they present this and always historically presented this to the local Muslim authorities to get protection from them, and they are still protected by the Muslim authorities. I remember I spent one Easter at this monastery, and it was a wonderful experience. On the Easter day, on Sunday, there is a habit, a custom, that the abbot of this monastery gathers the chiefs of the local tribes, the Bedouin tribes. They come together, they sit together, they share their tea, they don't drink wine at that ceremony. The Bedouins are Muslims, and they just discuss their things, have a nice conversation, and I saw this. Well, I was really surprised how peacefully good Christians and Muslims converse, and moreover, this happened on the day of the Easter. So the Muslims respected the day of the Easter. They came to the monastery, and the tribe sent their chiefs to that monastery. Of course, it is like this, as always in the East. It's not always that simple, that easy. There are always issues as well. So the Bedouin tribes and the monastery, they are dependent on each other very much. The Bedouins extend their protection to the monastery, and the monastery essentially feeds them. They would die out of starvation without the monastery, and the monastery would experience difficulties in the terms of security without the Bedouin tribes. Actually, the tribes themselves may create problems. If they feel that they are cheated, they are mistreated, they can really do harm to the monks. They even killed monks if they were feeling that they were not treated well. So it's a kind of model of relations between the Eastern Christian communities and Islam, this monastery. Okay? Any question? No? Okay, let's go then further. Another historical episode which is talking about the relations between the Muslim community and the Byzantine community is the episode of conquest of Constantinople, which happened in 1453. The capital of the Roman Empire, Constantinople, was conquered by the Sultan Mehmed II al-Fatih. Imagine the city, which was besieged for quite a while, resisted, fired back. Many citizens died, soldiers. The Harrison killed many Muslims who besieged the city. Eventually, the city was captured. And instead of just cleansing the city, killing the Harrison and important people there, al-Fatih, he decided to grant pardon. Of course, there were killings. There were cruel murders. For instance, the chief of the admiral of the imperial fleet, Nikiforos Mataras, he was killed in front of his children. And some other Byzantines who didn't want to give up, they were exterminated. But the rest, they were granted pardon, and moreover, al-Fatih was met by the Archbishop Gennadios Folarios, who is depicted here. This is the scene. This is a new mosaic. This is a non-historical one, but it depicts a historical episode of meeting between Muhammad al-Fatih and the person who would become, this Sultan would make the Patriarch of Constantinople, Gennadios Folarios. Gennadios was a prominent figure. He was a literate, a prominent writer, theologian, and he found very nice words about Muhammad. For instance, he used the word philanthropos for Muhammad, which means he was philanthropic. He was not hating people. He liked people. That is what Gennadius meant. And Muhammad confirmed all the rights of the Byzantine patriarchs. There were no any more Byzantine emperors. There were only Byzantine patriarchs, and he confirmed their rights. Moreover, he gave them more rights than they enjoyed under the Byzantium. For instance, in Byzantium, that they could not exercise any significant political power, the patriarchs. In the Ottoman setting, they did. They became not just spiritual leaders of the Christian community, they also became political leaders and judges for the local community. So all this was confirmed by the Sultan. And as in the case with the family of John of Damascus, which became prominent at the court of the caliphs, so in the Ottoman Empire, the Christians received prominent positions in the Turkish administration. There was a whole class of people with Greek Orthodox background who first served as interpreters, as translators, which was an important task for the Turks. If they wanted to rule the people, local people, they had to understand them. And first the class of translators emerged, and then they became also doing some administrative work. And actually they became prominent figures at the central administration of Sultan. Some of them who converted to Islam became even ministers and prime ministers at that point, the Grand Viziers. So there were Grand Viziers who had Christian background, but they had to convert to Islam. But at some lesser positions, they could keep their Christian faith and serve the Ottoman court. So this is one of the Sigurite Fanariot. They actually controlled everything. They controlled the church, they controlled Greek money, and even now largely the Greek wealth comes from that period. The Greeks now say Greece is a poor country, but Greeks are rich people. This is true. These riches come from the times of the Ottoman Empire. Most Greek fortunes, even here in America, in the United States, were earned in the Ottoman Empire. The ship owners from the islands, like Chios or Egina, they actually, you've probably heard these names, like Myakos and others. They actually earned their wealth under the Turks. Onassis was not this guy. Onassis earned his fortune during the World War II. He came from a very poor family. But that's why the big traditional Greek ship owners, families, they don't like Onassis because he's not from their flock. His fortune is not coming from the Ottoman period. Okay? Is this clear? From the Muslim perspective, there were reasons why to respect Christians. Christians and Jews had the same scripture that the Muslims had. Of course, Christians and Jews didn't have Quran, but they had the previous testaments, which the Muslims also valued, though the Muslims thought that the Bible is a corrupted scripture. So it is a scripture given from God, but it has been corrupted. But Christians and Jews had it, and that's why they were what they call the people of the book, al-Kitab. And that's why their religion was tolerated. Their religion was allowed on the Muslim land. Okay? And the Christians and the Jews were called al-Dimah, which means the protected people, because they had a part of the Muslim corpus of scriptures, even though corrupted, they were protected by the Muslim law. Okay? Is it clear? Well, it was not everything that nice, and there were some difficulties for Christians, certainly. Some of them were embedded in the Muslim law, in Sharia. According to Sharia, the non-Muslims had to pay taxes. This tax, a special tax for non-fidel, non-Muslims, was called jizya in Arabic, and the same word approximately in Turkish. Every Christian family, every Christian had to pay this tax, and this tax was quite heavy. Not everyone could afford it. And actually, as I told you already, only wealthy, kind of middle-class Christians could afford to pay this tax. And only the middle class, Christian middle class in the Middle East, afforded to remain Christian. The rest had to convert. If you cannot pay your tax, you either died or you convert to Islam. And this applied not only just to their households, not just to families, it applied also to the monasteries. Monasteries had to pay taxes as well, which led eventually to a closure of many monasteries. And the churches, the institutions had to pay taxes as well, which led them to corruption. You cannot close down the patriarchy. You need to find money to sustain it. And because you cannot earn money legally, you find corrupted way to earn money. That's how the patriarchs became dependent on the fanariots. The fanariots, rich families gave money. The patriarch bribed the sultan, and the sultan received that money and then installed the patriarch, confirmed the patriarch. And as Kathy also you indicated at the seminar, that this caused the situation when the patriarchs changed often every 1 or 2 years, and because the Turkish authorities were interested to consider new candidates for the patriarchy because this would bring them money. And there are other issues in the relations. I found these pictures when I was in Cappadocia. Enter every church, and in every church, the icons have eyes scratched out. The iris icon. Not all of them. Some of them they still have eyes, but most of them. And they did it very, precisely. They took care to scratch out the eyes, not the rest. However horrible it could look, it was a compromise because images are prohibited in Islam. So by the letter of the Islamic law, they had to destroy all the images, but they did. So by scratching the eyes, they made a kind of compromise, just to leave these icons as they were, but to fulfill the norms of the Sharia, of the Muslim requirements, and just to discharge these faces with taking off their eyes. Okay. And it's really interesting. I remember in one of those churches there was a venerated icon of St. George, and I remember there was a Muslim family, Turkish family from Turkish peasants. They entered the church, they put their candle in front of the icon, they had some kind of prayer, and they left, which was a blasphemy from the Islamic point of view. You cannot pray in front of the images to the Christian saints, and they did. And that's exactly the symbiosis that they had. They eventually came to adopt some Christian ways of prayer, of spirituality. They came to appreciate the icons, even though those icons are without eyes. So, on the one hand, you see Muslim families, Turkish families, praying in front of the Orthodox icons. And on the other hand, those icons are without eyes. So that is a kind of illustration of how Christians and Muslims lived together for quite a long. Is it clear? Any question? Yes, John.
Why the eyes? Was assumed just
Yes,
the eyes,
because
not
they
like something
believe that the
else.
eyes, they express the human image. They are quintessentially the image of the human being. And, well, at least they liked to believe like this, because if they accepted this, this means that they had not to destroy all their image, which was a great concession for the Muslims, as a matter of fact. You don't see the same, and it is mostly the case in the Turkish, on the Turkish lands, because you don't see this very often in the Arabic countries. So in the Arabic countries, we don't have practically no Christian monument, no icons, no mosaics, whatever. Well, with a few exceptions, as I mentioned also already, the St. Catherine Monastery has preserved the collection of the icons before the period of iconoclasm. We're going to discuss these icons. They are really wonderful. And they preserve those icons because of the Arabic dominance over the Sinai Peninsula. Well, it's just one of the abandoned churches. This church and many other churches were abandoned in the beginning of the 20th century when the Greek population had to leave. Most of the Greek population had to leave Asia Minor, as in the program of exchange between the Turkish and the Greek governments. So the Turkish people who lived in Greece had to move to Turkey, and Greek people who lived in Turkey had to move to Greece. It was after the collapse of what the Greeks call the Micro-Asian catastrophe, when the Greeks wanted to recapture Constantinople, but they failed and they actually lost the war with Turkey. Then huge numbers of people had to leave Turkey and to move to Greece. When I was in Turkey, I still met a person who was a translator, and we even exchanged in Greek with him, because in his childhood, when he was a child, he remembers these times. He was brought up in the central part of Greece, and then the family moved to Turkey. So a lot of tragedies, family tragedies, are hidden behind this program, but that's the reality. And the churches, these abandoned churches, is another indication of the vibrant Greek presence in the Turkish lands. Well, the Greeks would never say that they are Turkish, they would say they are Greek lands, but nevertheless under the Turkish Empire, under the Turkish rule, and they had to abandon those lands and those villages. Actually, when they moved to Greece, they brought everything with them, the relics, the names. If you go to Athens, the suburbs of Athens are named after the towns and villages which were in Turkey. So the entire villages just moved from Turkey to Greece, and they established themselves as suburbs around Athens and Thessaloniki with the same names. That's why they have Smyrni, Neadonia, for the regions, the districts in Athens. Okay. Is it clear? Well, also there were cases where Christians were killed for being Christians. It's not the case that the Christians were killed just for being Christians. They were killed for converting to Christianity. By the Ottoman War, if someone wanted to convert from Islam to Christianity, he or she had to be killed. It was a crime which was punished. Of course, the stories of the so-called new martyrs, new martyrs who were killed by Turks for converting or reconverting to Christianity, those stories are complicated. This is actually one of the martyrs. His name is Mikhail. He is depicted here in the traditional Greek, Turkish text. And the stories of some martyrs are complex. They were brought as Christians, most of them. Then, for different reasons, they had to convert to Islam. They willingly accepted Islam. Many reasons for that. Some of them committed crimes, and in order to avoid punishment for crime, they converted to Islam. There was an option for the criminals. If you want to avoid punishment for your crime, you can convert to Islam, and then you're okay. Some of them, they had or allegedly had committed crimes, converted to Islam, and then when they decided to come back to Christianity, it was already conversion from Islam to Christianity, which was punished by execution. Well, there is several dozens of new martyrs, the so-called new martyrs who were killed in the Ottoman period by the Turkish authorities for converting or reconverting Christianity. In the Kemalist time, other things happened because of the growth of nationalism on both sides. The Greek nationalism, the Turkish nationalism, they came to hate each other. They developed identities which were built on rejection. The other, who just a generation or two before was a peaceful neighbor. So they lived in neighborhood peacefully. But then the nationalist ideology, which affected both sides, alienated them from each other. And the new identities were built on rejection. The new Greek identity, for example, is built profoundly on the rejecting Turks. They say, well, Turks are horrible, they're humans. And what makes us Greek is not to be like them. And the same say about it. So it's a new thing. It's a new phenomenon. It's a product of nationalism as a secular ideology. But before that, it was not like that.